My name is Carrie Leidick. I'm one of the co-founders of Humantelligence, and I work with our clients on implementing Humantelligence to make culture change happen. Today, we're going to be answering some of the follow-up questions that came out of our webinar that we didn't have a chance to answer on the topic of inclusion and diversity and creating a more inclusive culture for organizations.
And hi, I'm David Sternberg. I also spoke on the panel about diversity and inclusion, and I'm just here to offer some color commentary and navigate these questions that we received. The first webinar question that we're going to be answering is, what if your target culture unintentionally excludes females and minorities?
My first reaction to that is, you're just doing it wrong. The first recommendation I would have is to get a really full understanding of the demographics of both your employees and your candidate pools as you're going through the recruiting process and looking at them at every stage. One of the common issues when you're having those unintended consequences is you're over-relying on employee referral programs as a source of candidates, which is really tempting because employee referral is one of the proven ways that successful candidates are identified and come into the organization, and they do succeed in the organization, but they often will reflect like a mirror your current employee base and those demographics, and it's just reinforcing those same demographics and reinforcing the same culture that you currently have. So if you're going through a culture change and you want to change those demographics, you have to get off of that employee referral as a primary source of candidates and move to other sources. In other words, you have to cast a broader net in your sourcing of candidates, and then look at every stage, of the hiring process. And then what happens to people post-hire, obviously, is really important too.
I think what I would add is that understanding your demographics, which you mentioned at the beginning, there's not really a trait that is exclusively set to one type of demographic. So if your culture is unintentionally excluding people, you have to look at what your culture is trying to gain: an intelligent employee, a creative employee, somebody who's different from what you already have on staff, because those traits aren't going to belong to somebody or exclusively to men or women. It just depends on what you want to look at. And most likely you have some kind of intentional bias that is preventing you from onboarding these people that would give you a more diverse thought and a different culture. And we all have biases that we don't know we have, which is why it's important to address diversity in a non-emotional manner.
Yeah, exactly. I think you make a great point where you want to start using unbiased measures, where, Humantelligence, of course, offers that, where you're able to look at these characteristics about, whether somebody is, let's say, more geared toward creativity or more geared toward, creating scalable processes and very structure-oriented. So you want to look at those role and team requirements as primary, rather than looking at the resume, because that's also another way that bias comes into this. If you have an over reliance on what school somebody went to, or what companies they've come from, you really want to define those characteristics that are unique to your culture, define them for the future, and then go after those characteristics. So I think, David, you made a great point.
Thanks. And I know that there's data specifically regarding the resume that you just mentioned that shows that somebody's name is a huge part of what resumes are looked at and which ones are not looked at. Specifically, more ethnic sounding names have a much lower rate of being just viewed by an employer, which brings to mind one of my favorite quotes, which I mentioned earlier. There's no such thing as computer error, only human error. So if you're using a software that does not identify these characteristics that you would not want to address as a person, you're not going to have as much discrepancy in who you're viewing as opposed to if you were as a person, because people have all these, like I said, bias they don't even know that they have. So that's why an implementation of a software can be so advantageous.